Alright, getting started with a secondhand frame. I was deciding between two that I found in a dumpster somewhere important. Hats off to you if you get that reference. One blank and one that says "It's good to be us." I knew that I would have 3 sardine type fish on it, so I used this plastic piece that came with a stretchy toy that I have kept for so long as a decider. And I decided "It's good to be us" would live to see another day. Instead, I used this blank one. I took out the glass from behind it and used the frame to map out on a scrap piece of cardstock what the new backing would be like, and I traced. Then cut that out just inside the line that I just traced. Placed it into the frame to make sure that it would fit. I used the same plastic piece to make sure once again that it would work, just in case the frame somehow decided it wanted to be smaller when I turn it around. As for the tin of sardines they will be in, I wanted to technically use actual tin for the base structure to give it more structure, so I grabbed some off a Pepsi can. I cut down the edges to make them not as jagged, and then I halved it hot dog style and cut it down to the size I thought I wanted it to be. I ended up cutting it down even shorter, but for now, this worked. Once I cut that one out, I used it as a stencil to cut the rest out, making 4. Though I didn't actually need or use the 4. And then I bent and shaped it until I had the shape that I wanted it to be, holding them in place with painter's tape easily enough. To make this piece become one, instead of all of these little pieces of literal garbage, I used regular old school glue and newspaper from who knows how many years ago to simply do a paper mache. I added this to the cardstock and around the tin pieces. As I waited for them to dry down, I used the plastic piece that looked like a fish, and originally I wanted it to be my mold, but I added some oven-baked clay into it and then put it into the oven, because that's how you work with oven-baked clay, and I realized that the plastic would not be holding up to the heat more than once, because it was already a little bit warpy. Warpy? It was already a little bit warped. So my next step was to make my mold out of silicone, mixing equal parts of A and B together and placing it over the top of the mold, until it cured. I made sure where the face was flattened so this could be used in the future for any type of fish faces. Not that I'm going to be using it in the future, but you never know.
I mean, does it look like a fish? Kind of.
Once it was cured, I placed some air-dried clay in it and let it dry out a little bit. Then peeled the silicone off of it. Whenever you're dealing with a silicone mold and air-dried clay, you always want to peel the silicone rather than the clay, because the clay will stretch as you peel it, but the silicone won't, at least not in my experience. And if it does, it goes right back to its shape because it's, well, silicone. Now, the underside being blocked off from the air made it so it was still a little bit damp, so I used a few tools to give it an eye socket, an open mouth, and gills, and cut off any excess clay that wasn't fully dry to reuse it. Then another tool to further shape these scales. I did this 2 more times, being sure to let them dry on an acrylic paint bottle to give them some sort of a shape. I did do a dry fit on it again just to make sure once again that they would fit. And I realized I didn't like their size compared to how tall the walls were, so this is the part I was talking about where I cut them down a little bit further and then put painter's tape all around the edges to make sure that it wasn't dangerous for me to be touching. Next up was the paint job, or rather the prime job. It's prime time! Using just a basic white acrylic paint over the whole thing, I think I used 3 coats or so. And I did take the now reinforced cardstock out so I could get to the end with the paint and not risk getting it onto the actual frame. I also added the white base coat to the fishies. With multiple tones of blue, once the base coat was dry, I painted them up. A dark blue for the top of the face, the dorsal fin, and a slightly lighter one on the pelvic fin and caudal fin. I also did add the dark blue as a light wash to the upper scales and then a very light blue to the rest of the scales. Basically like a dry brush of it. Alongside some hints of dark blue to the facial area. For the eyes, I'm using puffy paints, a white one, and then black one for the pupil, and then a white one for the shine, or like the glare. When the white cardstock piece was finished drying, I added some glue along the edges, just some school glue once again, and some more newspaper to start on the top of the tin can, pressing down the edges with a paintbrush and the water and glue mix, as well as adding it to the top. And then once that was dry to the touch, I added one more round of newspaper and taped it to the top and underside of the established already lit newspaper. Then I rolled it and taped it to actually start to look like a rolled up tin. Being sure to paint inside the rolled up newspaper bit as well. Finally, it was time for the full paint job. As this is a comically large tin of sardines, I referenced multiple pop art photos to determine what the paint job was that I actually wanted, as there are many different types of canned sardines, fun fact, that you probably already know, but because I don't actually eat sardines, I don't know. I wanted this to have fun colors. If you don't have fun colors on your wall art, what is the point of making comically large wall art pieces? I did a yellow on the top portion of the tin, and around the sides and the bottom perimeter. Then a baby blue on the bottom portion. When the blue was drying and the yellow was actually dry, I started mapping out what the tin would actually look like in pencil, and then matched up the colors. Blue fins to match the blue of the bottom of the tin. As well as an obvious silver for the rolled up piece. Continued with the logo and what kind of sardines these actually are, which are bathing in olive oil, but fancy because it's French. Which I knew I wouldn't be painting on, so I used black permanent marker instead. I made the sardines word pop even more by adding the black marker along the edges, some of the edges. I enjoy using multiple mediums in my art, especially to add texture to it, so I used some of the clay I had previously cut off my fish and shaped it into 2 olive shapes. Cut those in half to make 4 because that's how math works, and then cut out leaves as well and textured them with a single line down the center to kind of make the leaves fold in on themselves a little. Once they were dry to the touch and they all got a paint job, an olive green for, well, the olives, and a dot of black marker on the top of each, or the bottom I guess, doesn't really matter. And then the leaves got a medium green with a watered down dark green for the line in the middle, which I actually dabbed off the excess with a paper towel. I did yet another dry fit to find out where I like the olive pieces, and used a green permanent marker as the stems, drawn on. Place these on, I used E6000 glue, a little bit on the back as well as the leaves, which I only placed a little dollop on the bigger portion of it, or the thicker I guess portion of it, so they could come off the canvas a little bit. And because I obviously hadn't added enough texture or layers to this thing, I also wanted the sardines to be removable. So with some more E6000, I added 3 magnets in the tin, and then 3 more to the fish, so 1 for each of them. Now they can move around a little bit, be taken out, or even switch places. For a minute, it felt like I worked at Dairy Queen, flipping it upside down to show that nothing will come out. I continued the paint job ever so slightly with the yellow around the top perimeter. And you might be thinking, Sarah, there's definitely not enough texture added to this ridiculous piece of art. How does the tin even open? And I get that. And I raise you a tin opener. Made with jute covered wire that I shaped into it. Again, it's so comically large. And then I wrapped it in some air dried clay. Painted it with that same white base. And then a silver. While that dried, I quickly finished off the paint job with a light blue on the corners. And you can even see that I added it to the yellow, which I will regret later on and change. To finish it off, I'm adding a very thin layer of resin on the cardstock, the tin, and the fishies.
Oh no.
And I use it to keep the tin opener secured into place. And here we are, perhaps one of the most ridiculous pieces of a comically large decor I've ever made for myself, in all of its glory. That is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoy. I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.